lassù in montagna. Oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Seppellire lassù in montagna, sotto l'ombra di un bel fior.
Today we'll discuss how the police and the military might work in a Titoist nation and how it worked in Yugoslavia. First, let's discuss the police, since the last episode I lightly mentioned crime. I might switch between saying militia and police, but they're the same in this case, so please don't get too confused. The militia, or militia, was the main regular civilian police force in Yugoslavia that was formed in 1944 after the liberation of Belgrade from fascist forces. Of course, like much of Titoist ideas, police were decentralized in Yugoslavia and organized on a local level. The militia was under the control of the Republican or Provincial Secretaries of Internal Affairs, who were appointed by the President of the local republic. Although it was also managed on a federal scale by the Federal Secretary of Internal Affairs, we'll call them FSIA, who was appointed by the President and in charge of the federal police/militia. The relation between the federal and republic or provincial police force was based on cooperation and assistance rather than command, as the FSIA could not command the republican or provincial militias directly. However, the federal militia was overviewed by the Federal Executive Council, and the republican and provincial police were overviewed by their respective executive councils. On the federal level, the council was elected by the Federal Assembly, and on the Republican and provincial level, elected by their respective assemblies. Speaking of command, what would a Titoist police command structure look like, or would there be any? In Yugoslavia, ranks and formation of police force changed a lot, although most were organized as police forces like elsewhere to an extent. However, the most significant change in policing was after 1966. When researching this period, I found it to be a bit confusing due to some contradictory sources. So if I am completely off, please leave a comment that might better explain it. From my understanding, between 1967 and 1974, the ranks were very limited and police were very decentralized. According to some sources, ranks were replaced with roles, such as being focused on traffic or crime investigation. The Secretary of Internal Affairs, we'll call SIA, would be in charge of equipping and managing the police to follow directives by the Republican or provincial assemblies. An example of this might be if there's a concert in a town and there's going to be a lot of traffic with that. The Republic's or provincial's or even communal's Secretary of Internal Affairs would call for X amount of traffic officers to show up to help with directing traffic. Of course, the more local positions of municipal SIAs and police forces were decentralized differently based upon the communal and Republican or provincial assemblies. Although ranks were still around to an extent, they were mostly decentralized compared to other police forces especially. However, with issues of right-wing nationalists, terrorist organizations, reforms had to be made. Laws in 1972, 77, and 79 created a militarized police task force, and special forces were created to deal with such concerns. Likewise, ranks were brought back, and by 1976 the police force looked more like a regular police force elsewhere again. The Secret Service of the State Security Administration, better known as UDBA, but also referred to in some cases as SDB, also underwent decentralization, however to a lesser extent. Intelligence was handled by 3 federal ministries. State Security Administration managed the interior, the Service for Research and Documentation managed foreign intelligence gathering, and the Counterintelligence Service, or KOS, dealt with counterintelligence for the army. Unlike the militia, UDBA in local areas was not autonomous, but still answered to the federal levels, and also to the party in particular, and more restrictions than the KGB or the CIA in that it was not controlled by a single leader. Likewise, there was a focus on collectivism and brotherhood, social harmony, and loyalty, along with tolerance towards those with different views. However, the UDBA didn't have a lot of power, much like other secret police forces. From 1967, the UDPA began to focus more on internal security. This did not mean, though, that they did not continue to carry out assassinations after 1967. Rather, they increased. These assassinations were carried out mostly against right-wing nationalists such as those who were part of the Ustasha. However, these assassinations included critiques of the regime and or Marxist-Leninists, particularly supporters of Stalin. Political prisoners were sent to camps or islands like Goli Otok to do manual labor. Now that we've covered the police, let's discuss the armed forces. As mentioned in the first episode, the presidencies were the heads of the armed forces and could give the highest ranks of the military. However, some tasks could be given to the Secretary of Defense, who could command the GNA and the Territorial Defense. Ranks were broken down like most armies. As I mentioned in my video on what a Titoist government would look and did look like, I discussed the importance of representation. In Article 242 of the 1974 Constitution, it states, "The composition of the strategic staff and the employment in the high command and leadership functions of the Yugoslav People's Army has to ensure the proportional representation of the republics and autonomous provinces," continuing the idea of proportional representation and inclusion within the military. I won't fully break down the ranks, units, and composition of the Yugoslav military in this video, as this is focusing more on Titoism and its ideals and practices. However, I will mention the class of brigades, regiments, and battalions once after I finish discussing conscription. So let's start talking about conscription in Yugoslavia. 1 year of military service was mandatory for all male Yugoslavs. Yugoslav men would register on their 17th birthday and would be inducted in either the spring or autumn of their 19th birthday. Men between the ages of 18 and 55 could be drafted in the case of or threat of war, although retirement was required for those ages 40 or 60 years of service, except for those in officer ranks outside of wartime. Now, of course, you could choose to stay within the military, but the brigades, regiments, and battalions were set into classes depending on how manned they were before mobilization in case of war. Class A were at least 60% mobilized, if not 100%. Class B were 15 to 60% mobilized. And finally, Class R were between 15 to 20% mobilized and were acting as reserves. There was also the Territorial Defense, or TO, which in non-wartime was very small and is described as a form of National or Home Guard. However, in the case of war, it would grow massively, and I would describe it more to my fellow Americans as similar to Minutemen. The doctrine of the TO was based on the partisan warfare of World War II. As I mentioned, people were inducted into the army for a year, which would give people training and some combat readiness. In the case of war, the TO would be organized on a communal or workplace level to form a company-sized detachment. In regards to the police, I personally support more of a community-based protection system, similar to the Black Panthers, or having something similar to the TO as a police force instead. I think personally my end goal would be to have no police, but that might be due to the fact that police here in America are notoriously abusive and work with right-wing groups. In regards to the treatment of Marxist-Leninists or other leftists, I feel that lefty unity is very important, and that just because they're a part of a different leftist group, they shouldn't be arrested or assassinated like they were by the UDPA. Rather, I think those who have a leadership role in right-wing groups should be, as us Titoists say, sent to the vacation islands. But I think with the average bootlicker, they should be re-educated, or at least we should try and imprison or deal with them otherwise as a last resort. I myself support the idea around the military and conscription, as it would be important for a socialist to be prepared in case of a capitalist attempt to take over, or even a fascist one. Thank you for watching, and if you think I missed something really important or have better explanations like for the police structure, please leave a comment. If you want to stay up to date with my channel, I have an Instagram and now a Twitter too. If you haven't already and want more Titoist content, or I plan on going into more socialist military ideas, Click the subscribe button and remember to hit the bell notification to be notified.
Armia!